So, good evening, all of you, and welcome to the Astro-Adda program, which is a joint initiative of Regional Science Center and Planetarium and Public Outreach and Education Committee of Astronomical Society of India. So, we are in the fourth edition. Previously, actually, this program was done by Delhi Planetarium, but this is the fourth episode, which after RSC has taken up. And so, first of all, we will have a welcome address by the project coordinator, the curator of this center, Binoy Kumar Dubey. He is the project coordinator and he will be giving you the welcome address. So, Saab, can you just deliver the welcome address? Yeah. It's not audible.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible. You are audible.
Okay. Namaskar, friends. Thank you so much to be here with us for this online session. Wishing you all a very happy World Ozone Day, and let us pledge that to use ozone-friendly materials or products today and for the entire of our life. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to our guest, Dr. Vikram Khairaji, who took out his valuable time, and today he's here with us. After our last episode that were about the astronomical belief and culture in tribal people, today we come with a new topic, that is counting photons in the universe. Friends, the Hubble Ultra Deep Field shows some 10,000 galaxies, some of them dating back to less than a billion years ago after a Big Bang. And to answer many riddles and curiosity regarding the universe, scientists use various tools, methodology, and methods. Like we know, by studying the wavelength of light emitted by stars, we can see how far away they are and how fast they move. Most of the light emitted by stars live in this galaxy, and we know that light is made up of photons and that have no electric charge and mass. Trillions of stars emit photons over most of the lifetime on the of the cosmos. These photons generate extragalactical background light, which is the integrated intensity of all the light emitted throughout the history of the universe across the whole of the electromagnetic spectrum. So, but despite these large numbers, if we don't count the contribution of the sun and the Milky Way, the light reaching us is very, very low. So I think today we'll try to discuss all those topics regarding these photons and how it helps us in measuring the different aspects of the universe. Cutting my narrative short, I welcome once again Dr. Vikram Khairaji, and over to Mr. Gangopadhyay, please.
Yeah, thank you. So before I introduce our speaker today, I'll just try to remind all the audience that this program is Astro-Adda. So it is somewhat informal, and you can always you are encouraged to actually always ask questions and doubt. It is a type of a gathering with somebody who is sharing and somebody who is accepting and learning or knowing, getting aware. So be interactive, so that will make the program more interesting. So now coming back to the introduction of our speaker, Dr. Vikram Khare has completed his Masters in Physics from University of Pune. Then he joined for PhD at Inter-University Center of Astronomy and Astrophysics, IUCAA, Pune. After completing his PhD, he has done 4 years of postdoctoral research, 1 year in the National Center of Radio Astrophysics, Pune, and 3 years in the University of California, Santa Barbara. In the last year, he has joined the Indian Institute of Space Science and Technology, Thiruvananthapuram, as a DST Inspire faculty. Vikram's main research is focused on studying intergalactic medium and extragalactic background light. He will be talking today on extragalactic background light, which according to him is nothing but just counting photons in the universe. So we are going to have a good talk, and Vikram Saab, you can continue your talk. Yeah.
Thanks, Jayant and Binoy, for nice introduction. I'll share the screen and start. So You are encouraged to ask questions anytime you feel. You can see the first slide, right?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, we can see.
Okay. Yeah, so Binoy kind of gave introduction to the thing which I'm going to tell anyway. Okay. So, this is an informal setting, right? So if you ask me that describe your research just in one line, then I'll tell you that I just count photons. Okay, I count photons coming from the stars, all the stars in the universe, as well as photons coming from the bright rings around supermassive black holes, all supermassive black holes in the universe. Okay, so the stars are like kind of shown here in this particular image. And one of the example of bright rings around supermassive black hole is this image, a donut-shaped image here. This image is obtained by Event Horizon Telescope, something around April of 2019, just 2 years ago. So this is a very tiny region around at the center of a galaxy, which is named as M87 galaxy, Messier 87 galaxy. So now, can I tell you that I count photons? The first question you should ask me is that, like, how do you count photons? Okay, and the second question, if you are a taxpayer or somebody who is sitting in the financial committee to fund our projects, you should ask, like, why do I even count the photons? Right? What is the purpose of counting the photons? So, taking cues from these two things, I am going to divide my talk into basically two parts. In the first part, I will tell you like how I count photons. What do I mean by counting photons? What exactly is the photon? And in the second part, I will tell you, I'll basically glance through some of the applications of or some of the uses of counting photons. Okay, what kind of information these photons tell us about the universe and how it evolves. So let us jump into the first part directly. Okay, so how do I count photons? So before I tell you how do I count photon, let me just give you a very brief background of what is a photon. Okay, just because the audience here is like very, very diverse. Although I see like some of the experts are also joining. So to understand what is a photon, you should know what is a light. Okay, and it's simply saying the light is nothing but an electromagnetic wave. The electromagnetic wave is basically the oscillations of electric and magnetic field, which can be represented. It's a diagram something like this, where the light is propagating in one direction, and there are two perpendicular directions to the direction of the propagation. These two perpendicular directions is where magnetic field and electric field oscillate. So basically, electric field generates the perpendicular magnetic field, and magnetic field generates electric field, and this is how light propagates. Okay, so this was realized first time by James Maxwell in 19th century, mid of the 19th century, and he famously wrote 4 equations of electromagnetism. These four equations of electromagnetism basically describes how the electric field and how the electric and magnetic field propagate through the space and time. And to his surprise, he found that the speed of propagation of electromagnetic wave is exactly same as the speed of light. This is where he hypothesized that light is also an electromagnetic wave, and his deduction, his hypothesis was perfectly right. Okay, one of the ways to classify any wave is basically to look at its wavelength. Wavelength is basically the length between the two crests or two troughs of the wave. Okay, so which is here written in terms of wavelength. The wavelength is in a notation. Wavelength is usually denoted by the Greek letter lambda. So next breakthrough to understand the nature of light happened after something like 50 years, which is like in the starting of 20th century, in 1901, when Max Planck was trying to explain the radiation coming from a perfect absorber, which is also called as black body radiation. Okay, but he was not able to basically come up with the correct answer. Not just he, but like many people tried before him, and everybody was getting answers which are like having infinite energies. So he came up with a solution, a very ad hoc solution. He proposed that the energy of the electromagnetic wave is not a continuous energy, rather it's a discrete. So the electromagnetic wave has energy packets, very, very small, tiny packets. Okay, and these packets are called as photons. Okay, this is the only equation which I have in this talk. Okay, so energy of this is such an electromagnetic wave is written as hc divided by lambda, where h is the Planck's constant, rightly named after Max Planck. C is the speed of light and lambda is wavelength. The point of showing this particular equation is that you see the relation between energy and wavelength. So energy is inversely proportional to the wavelength lambda. What it means is that the high energy photons or high energy electromagnetic radiation have wavelengths which are small, low lambda, and exactly opposite, the low energy photons have higher wavelengths. The same hypothesis was used later by Albert Einstein, and one of his papers in 1905, which was on photoelectric effect, he could explain the photoelectric effect using the particle nature of light when he used photons and the concept developed by Max Planck. Both of these people got Nobel Prize for this discovery. Okay, Albert Einstein got the Nobel Prize for the photoelectric effect, basically explaining or kind of proving that light consists of these tiny photons. Now, if I have to be like technically correct, then the photons are not just tiny packets of energy. Okay, they are basically the force carriers of electromagnetic force. Okay, which was realized in something around 1950s when the quantum electrodynamics was developed. But as far as this talk is concerned, you don't have to worry about all those things. When I say I am counting photon, I am basically counting light at different wavelengths. When I say I'm counting light, I'm just going to show you some units of intensity of light. Okay, so it's very simple. Okay, I'm going to so this is my main focus of the research, but I'm going to mellow down in such a way that it is understandable to anybody from kind of high school background. So when I say like I'm counting photons at different wavelengths, what do I mean by different wavelengths? Okay, so the photons come at different wavelengths. If you combine all those wavelengths together, they form a spectrum which is rightly called as electromagnetic spectrum. I'm going to show you the electromagnetic spectrum. I have there is a nice illustration of electromagnetic spectrum here. What I'm showing here on the down here is basically a scale in meters, and you can see the scale is in logarithm in the sense like it's going in the powers of 10, and the different regions of this particular scale are denoted by different regions in the electromagnetic spectrum. Okay, so very high energy photon. Remember, the wavelength for high energy photon is very, very small. So the wavelength is like 10 to the power minus 18 meter. Okay, so at this wavelengths, the photons are basically gamma rays. These are the photons which emanate from the nuclear reactions and isotopic decays. Okay, nuclear bombs, for example. You go to the slightly higher energies, which are the units of energy which I'm going to use, and you don't have to worry. Okay, you can just look into the wavelengths here. Wavelength up into the minus 10 to the minus 12. The energies are of the order of kilo electron volts. So these are X-rays. Okay, go to slightly higher wavelength, then there is ultraviolet region and infrared. Somehow this diagram, which doesn't show the visible, but visible part is very, very small here between the ultraviolet and infrared. Basically the size of my mouse cursor, okay? And the color scheme is just random here, so don't even look at the color scheme here, okay? So then there is infrared. As you go to higher and higher wavelength, lower and lower energy, then there is microwave. This is where your microwave oven operates, and this is where satellite communicate. Then you come to the radio waves. Radio waves, like if you whatever device you are using right now in front of you, either mobile or your laptop. They're using basically radio waves, okay, radio wave receiver and transmitters. These radio waves, like your telephone and television will work with radio waves. Your Wi-Fi is basically using kind of radio waves. Okay. So you are basically like, if you look at this particular electromagnetic spectrum, you are already familiar with almost every part of the electromagnetic spectrum. The point of me showing the electromagnetic spectrum is that people realize, instead of like, I shouldn't say people, astronomers realized in something like 50 years ago that stars shine in all wavelengths. So this is not really a surprise now, because like every object emits light in almost every wavelength. Okay, like it almost covers the whole spectrum of electromagnetic radiation. Like this is how, for example, night vision goggles work. Okay, they will be looking at you from in infrared wavelength. Not only that, if you really ask me, like, do humans emit in gamma rays? They do. Okay, because we breathe and we eat things which have radioisotopes. Okay, the radioactive isotopes, such as, for example, potassium-40. And sometimes potassium-40 will decay and it will emit gamma rays. Okay, not only that, this gamma ray will coming out of your body, it can knock out electron from some of your other elements in your body. And you can also emit in X-rays. Only thing is, like, the emission coming from you is very, very small. That is why nobody builds detector of X-ray or gamma ray to detect human. Okay, they are doing it in infrared. Okay, so let us talk about stars. So I'm going to show you image of stars in all wavelengths. Now just look at this image. Okay, I'm going to show, like, I'm not showing one star here. What I'm showing is basically a very famous galaxy, Whirlpool Galaxy, which has very nice images. Okay, Whirlpool Galaxy in different wavelengths. Okay, on the left-hand side, you see the galaxy in a radio wavelength. Okay, when you see the galaxy in the radio wavelength, what you are basically seeing is a very cold gas. In astronomy, the cold gas is something which is less than 5,000 Kelvin. Okay, so less than 1,000 Kelvin is kind of very, very cold. Just to give a perspective, your water boils at 373 Kelvin. Okay, so this is cold for astronomers, 600 Kelvin. So this cool gas is basically the carbon monoxide gas. So the regions of the galaxy, some of the regions of the galaxy are so cool in the sense like they can reach 600 Kelvin, and you can form molecules. These molecules are emitting radio waves. Okay, so this is what is pictured here. Then you see the second picture. If you can see, I'm sure you can see my mouse cursor. Okay, so the second picture is basically the infrared, the same galaxy image in infrared. This is where you see cool stars. Okay, so you see like 4,500 Kelvin is what is called as cool stars. Okay, the wavelength which you are looking at here is called 1200 to 800 nanometers. Okay, 1 nanometer is 10 to the power minus 9 meters. I'm going to use units which are angstrom. Okay, so 1 angstrom is basically 10 nanometers. So you don't see the infrared by your eyes. Okay, so like you need an infrared detector, and this is where you basically pick up the stars which are very old, and that is why they are cool. Okay. Then in optical is what you can see this galaxy. Okay. Only thing is, like, this image is not taken from Earth. This is taken from Hubble Space Telescope, because then you can remove the effect of atmosphere. Atmosphere basically blurs the light. Okay. So in optical, this is the wavelength you see basically, very, very small range, like 450 to 750 nanometer. In angstrom, 4,500 to 7,500 angstroms. Okay. And this is so this optical image is basically composed of mainly by stars, which are like sun-like stars. So sun-like stars shine mostly in optical. Okay. Then you can also look at this image in ultraviolet. Like, we have a dedicated telescope in ultraviolet now, with India's own space telescope, AstroSat. Okay, but I'm not sure this is the image from AstroSat. I think this is the image from GALEX. GALEX is another UV telescope. So when you look at ultraviolet in between 4,000 to 2000 angstrom, 400 to 200 nanometers. Again, to look at in ultraviolet, you cannot do it from ground. You have to go into the space, okay, because the UV doesn't reach ground, at least below 3000 angstrom, okay, which is like 300 nanometer. So in ultraviolet, you basically see very hot stars. In X-ray, you can look at this particular image in X-ray, and X-ray is very interesting. Okay, so now you can see like X-ray is basically the center of the galaxy is shining in X-ray. Every galaxy at its center has a supermassive black hole, and that supermassive black hole, if it is active in the sense like if it is actively getting matter from surrounding, actively accreting matter, it forms very bright ring, the kind of bright ring which I showed in my first slide. Okay, the center of M87 galaxy. So this is very, very hot region, okay? And then this region is basically emitting in X-rays, okay? So this is radiation coming from the supermassive black hole. The accretion disk around the supermassive black hole, not exactly from the black hole, okay? And now one more important thing which you see here is like there is another emission which is here on top, okay, which is basically a merging galaxy. This is why Whirlpool galaxy is famous, because there is another galaxy which is kind of in the process of merging with this particular galaxy. Okay, so the point of showing this particular image is that stars shine in all wavelengths, not just stars. You can see this particular center of the galaxy, which is kind of a black hole. It also shines in other wavelengths, okay, which is bright in X-rays, but you can see the center is glowing in other images as well. Now, I'm going to show you this image. This image was already mentioned by Binoy.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, Vikram. I have a question.
Sure.
Can you please go to the last slide?
Yeah.
Like you said that when in the infrared, it is mostly emitted by the dying stars, right?
Yes.
That's what you said.
Okay. So there is another component in infrared. Okay, not just dying stars as well as the dust emission. Okay, so dust can absorb ultraviolet light, which is you can see in ultraviolet here. Okay, and then dust can scatter that light into infrared. Okay, so there is like old stars plus dust in the galaxy.
Okay. Now, my question was then, I have two questions. For example, like if you will see this 5 bands of light, in 4 of them you kind of see, nice continuous spiral galaxy starting from radio wave to ultraviolet. But in X-ray, it seems like there are some centers only which are emitting it,
right,
and maybe some diffusion.
Yeah.
So why is that? What exactly emits this X-ray? Which type of stars, and why it's not like scattered throughout the galaxy? Like, okay, I understand that maybe the center is very, very bright, and that's why you may not be able to see other. But is it the reason?
Yeah, X-ray is basically emitted by very, very hot gas. Okay, the center of the galaxy where there is accretion disk, not just the center of the galaxy. Like there are black holes, okay, which are not at the center of the galaxy, but they also have accretion disk. Accretion disk is where the matter gets accreted, and because of the friction, it gets heated a lot. Okay. So very, very hot gas, okay, which is kind of like a million Kelvin gas, okay, which is what is written here, okay, 10 million gas, okay, it emits in X-ray. So that doesn't happen around a normal star. That happens around the kind of a supermassive black hole, okay, and the gases which are around this black hole, okay.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks for the question. So this image was already discussed, okay, but I'm going to show you this image. This is one of my favorite images. Okay, this is the image taken by Hubble Space Telescope, which is known as Hubble Ultra Deep Field. Now, you see this image is like, this is the size of your phone right now, if you are using phone, or size of your like kind of a desktop, okay. So this image, like if I want to see like what is the size of this image on the sky, what you should do is like you take a straw and keep it at your arm's length. Okay, stretch your arm as okay, and look through the opening of the straw in the sky. That very, very tiny region you will see from the very tiny hole of the straw at your arm's length. That tiny region is basically this region, okay? And this region, every point in this region, every point in this image, okay, you have to zoom a lot. Okay, every point in this particular image is a galaxy. This tiny image is basically having 10,000 galaxies. There are the way this observation was targeted, like this observation was targeted in a field where there are very, very few stars. So in this tiny image, there are only 7 stars. Okay, so this is an exercise. You guys can like later on just download this image. It's available in Google. Okay, and see like where are the stars. Stars are basically these crossed hairs here. Okay, there are 7 crosshairs. So like this tiny image has a 10,000 galaxies. Only 7 stars from Milky Way. Now, if you assume like this is the kind of a distribution of galaxy over across the sky, okay, then it turns out you have to just multiply this 10,000 by the size of the whole region, okay, divided by the size of this tiny region. It turns out there are 10 to the power 11 galaxies, 100 billion galaxies. Okay, so every person in India can own something like 7 or 8 galaxies, and still there will be like 1 billion galaxies left in the universe. The point of showing this particular image is like there are so many galaxies, and not only that, there are also so much blank space in this particular image. Okay, that blank space is basically the empty regions. Okay, divide of stars. They are not basically empty. Okay, but divide of stars. There are no stars. Okay, so these galaxies emit light, and this light basically forms a uniform background radiation. Okay, so that uniform background radiation, also called as sometimes extragalactic background light, is what I'm going to calculate. Okay, this is what I mean by calculating all the photons in the universe. Okay, so what exactly I'm counting here? I'm basically taking a unit volume. Okay, putting in some region which is not very close to galaxy, not very close to a star. Okay, so I want to calculate an average number of photons per unit volume in the universe. Okay, the volume of the whole universe is not very well defined. It depends on the way you want to like call it the volume. Okay, basically people talk about the volume of visible universe, but the best thing is you don't have to worry about volume. You calculate the number density. So when I say I'm counting photon, I'm basically looking into the number of photons per unit volume. Not even that. Okay, like even I can use even simpler things. Okay, I can actually calculate what is average intensity of light in some units. Okay, so don't worry about units. Okay, I'll show you the units. So the people interested can look into the units. Okay. What you have to calculate the average intensity of light in some units at different wavelengths. Okay, so this is what we want to calculate. And why do we want to calculate? That is the second part of the talk. So what we are looking after is basically this extragalactic background light. What I want to calculate on y-axis here, the vertical axis, is intensity of light in some units, Jnu, versus wavelength here. For time being, like you can assume the wavelength is increasing on the right hand side. But because like people plot in terms of energy as well, so this is like taken as like everybody plots the way they want. Okay, either increasing on the left hand side or like decreasing on the left hand side. So what I want to calculate is basically this plot. Okay, I want to calculate how the intensity of light as a function of wavelength looks like. Okay, in the universe. Okay, like in the average intensity of light. This is basically called extragalactic background light. Now, how do I do it? Like it's a very simple procedure. Okay, the only thing it turns out like when you write down everything, it becomes very complicated. So let me show you a cartoon. Okay, I cannot show you 3D universe at every time, but what I can show you the 2D universe. So what you are going to assume here is that there is one axis here. Okay, this one axis which is written as z-axis. Okay, and there are these planes here. Okay, there are these two-dimensional planes. So assume that each plane is a universe at that particular z. Okay, so what is z? Z is basically redshift. Okay, this is the famous quantity used by a cosmologist. Okay, because this has a very nice, interesting property. Okay. But ideally, this z is nothing but a time axis. Okay, so like at redshift z equal to 0, which is the time now, I'm going to call it as like now 0 years. Redshift 2 is something like 10.4 billion years ago, and you can go up and up to Redshift 10. Redshift 10 is like 13.2 billion years ago. Now you see, like this is not very intuitive in time, so that is why like people define redshift, and the definition of redshift has like something else, which I don't want to go into. Okay, but to give you a very brief idea about the redshift, the universe, like the universe is expanding. Okay, universe is expanding like it's expanding so fast that if you look at any two galaxies which are something like 3 million light years away from each other, they will be moving with speed of something like 70 kilometers per second. Okay, this is called a Hubble expansion. Okay, so the universe is expanding very, very rapidly. What happens, like when you go from redshift 0 here to redshift 2, the universe was like 2 times from, okay, so the universe at redshift 2 will be 2 times smaller than the universe at redshift 0, universe today. Okay, universe at redshift 10 would be 10 times smaller than the universe today. Okay, so the redshift is basically the multiplicative factor by which the universe's size will grow. Okay, so I'm going to talk about redshift. Or like if you're not like comfortable with redshift, you can always look at the right hand, like left hand side here, which is showing the time. Okay, so let me recap. These slices, the 2-dimensional slices, is our 3D universe. Okay, on this particular axis. Now, if I want to calculate the background light, what I need to know is like what are the sources? Okay, where are the stars here? So if you know, and I don't have to talk about stars, okay, because like individual stars are not interesting. What I'm going to talk about, and that is the point of showing you image of Hubble ultra deep galaxies, because the galaxies are a collection of stars. And I just want to know the distribution of galaxies. Okay. But now, if you remember, like in the first slide, I told like I'm counting light from stars as well as supermassive black holes. So I'm going to divide the sources in 2 types of sources. The first source is basically this one, which is called as quasar or the supermassive black hole. Nothing fancy there. Okay, these are basically glowing supermassive black holes. So I know the distribution of glowing supermassive black holes because astronomers like to count things. Okay, when I teach students like first lessons in astronomy, I basically tell them like if you want to be an astronomer, you just need to know few things. Okay, you need to know how to count objects, how to measure time, and how to measure distances. And then you have every tool to be an astronomer. Okay, so astronomers' favorite time pass is like counting things. Okay, and that's exactly what I'm doing. Okay, counting photons. So by counting supermassive black holes, okay, at different redshift, we know the distribution of these black holes at different redshifts. So these black holes are, I'm going to call all these supermassive black holes in a blanket term, which are called as quasars. Okay, so I showed you this particular image of a supermassive black hole brightening around supermassive black hole. Brightening around the supermassive black hole here, but this is a very tiny region of the galaxy. Okay, we are looking at this, and not only that, the image which you see here is a radio image. Okay, and this was the main thing about this particular image. This was the most important thing about this particular image, that only in the radio wavelength is what you can achieve a very high resolution to look at the very tiny region of another galaxy. Okay, the M87 is another galaxy. Now people came up with the ingenious idea. Okay, in radio telescope, I'm just digressing a little. Okay, in radio telescope, you can combine 2 telescopes together and use a technique, something called as interferometry, and then you get an equivalent size of a telescope, which is equivalent of like putting these two telescopes together. Okay, drawing a line between the 2 telescopes. So people come up with the idea, like if you want to observe a very tiny region of a galaxy, basically looking for the centers of galaxy, you need a huge telescope. So this is the Event Horizon Telescope is not a one telescope. Okay, it's a combination of all the telescopes around the globe. So effectively, they created the radio telescope of the size of Earth, and that is where they could look at a very tiny region of this particular galaxy and see the ring ring around this particular quasar, a particular supermassive black hole. Okay, so these bright regions in the center of galaxy, when they are very active and when they are outshining the galaxy, they are called as supermassive black hole or quasars. I'm going to show you the images of quasar, but just to point out like how tiny is this thing. Like if you tell me to draw a galaxy M87 around this particular donut size ring, okay, the same size here, okay, then you can actually try to calculate how big would be the galaxy, like how big should be the region on which I should draw the M87 galaxy, okay, or like put the pictures pixel by pixel around this thing so that I can have the ring of the size which you are seeing on your phone or on your laptop, okay. So assume like this, their diameter is 1 centimeter, and if you really want to draw a galaxy around this, you do this calculation, okay. It will turn out that the size of the galaxy which you should draw around this thing to preserve the size of the central region to be 1 centimeter in diameter should be of the order of like many Trivandrum cities, okay. It should be bigger than the size of like whole area of the Kerala state, okay. This is a fun calculation, you guys can do it, okay. So the point of telling you this is a very tiny image, okay. So I'm going to show you the images of quasar. Okay, the images I'm showing you 6 images of quasar. On the left hand side is basically a typical image, okay, where the center of the galaxy, like you can see the galaxy here as well, okay. The center of this particular galaxy is so bright that it is outshining the galaxy. In other images, on this particular image or the image at the bottom left, what you see is like this, it looks like a star, okay, because the galaxy, you don't even see galaxy because now the galaxy is completely outshined by the quasar, okay. Quasar meaning the glowing center of the galaxy, supermassive black hole. So the name quasar was given, like the short form of quasar is also called as, like, sometimes written as QSO. Again, I'm using terms very loosely. The QSO is quasi-stellar object because it looked like a star. Okay, you can see the cross here, okay, which is a signature of like very point source. Okay, so that is why like I want to divide the things into like different classes, the quasars. Okay, so I explained you quasars. If I know the distribution of quasars, okay, and if I know the radiation the kind of radiation emitted by a quasar, okay, then I can just multiply like the number of quasars by this particular shape of the radiation emitted by quasar, and that should give me a very nice idea about the radiation coming from the quasar at any location in the universe. Okay, so this is the radiation coming from quasar. This is just I'm just showing you a cartoon. Okay, next thing is like you also know the distribution of galaxies whose centers are not actually glowing. Okay, so these are normal galaxies. If the centers of galaxies are glowing, they are quasars. Okay, so you also know the distribution of galaxies in the universe. Again, because we love to count things. Okay, we counted galaxies at different redshift, and we know the distribution of galaxies. Then, if you take the typical spectrum emitted by the galaxy, you can basically add that spectrum on top of this here, and the addition of both of these things should give you a background light. Okay, so this is what we calculate. Now, only thing which makes it complicated is that the universe is not static. The universe is expanding, which I'm not showing here. Okay, although it is encoded in the redshift information, I'm not showing that the size of the universe is increasing. Not only that, like when the size of the universe is increasing, the number density of photon decreases. Okay. Also, the energy of photon shifts. Okay, so that is why the redshift term comes there. Okay, although I did not explain you how the redshift happens. So this makes the equation a little complicated to solve. Okay, and if you solve it, and I'm leaving one part out of it, which I'll come back later. If you solve it with using the information such as the distribution of quasar, distribution of galaxy, and the average radiation coming from the quasars and galaxy, what you get is basically this spectrum. Okay, now But I'm showing on, like, I'm showing wavelength on top axis. Okay, so wavelength is decreasing on the right hand side. So I'm looking at high energy photon. Okay, and I'm also plotting energy on the bottom here. So this is the radiation which you should see at redshift 0. Redshift 0 is meaning today, now. Okay, so the calculation which we do, okay, which is done in one of our paper here. That calculation is shown here with the blue curve, which goes very nicely through observations. Okay. Now, what are these observations? So these observations are basically obtained from satellites. Okay. So what you do is like there are many instruments working in different wavelengths. So this instrument look at the blank patch of the sky. Okay. And in blank patch of the sky, they just collect light. And they found out like how many photons they get at different wavelengths. Only thing they have to worry about, and that is what it is quite complicated for observing the background, is that you have to remove the radiation coming from the galaxy, because you're looking at the radiation which is coming from outside the galaxy. And then like I'm just combining like different instruments. Like you can see here, so above like 10 to the power 3 electron volt, wavelength less than say 1 angstrom. This is the region of like X-ray and gamma ray. So let me explain some of the regions here. Okay, so on the left hand side, which you see here, okay, this is a far infrared. Okay, this is basically coming from the dust in the galaxy. Okay, so this is the dust emission from galaxies across the whole universe. Okay, so I'm counting. I'm not just counting the photons emitted by galaxy at this redshift. I'm counting photons emitted by all over the universe. Okay, so that was the point of showing that particular cartoon and slices of the universe. Then the second peak which you see is in the near infrared. That near infrared peak is coming from the old stars. Okay. And then you see like there are observations till something like close to 1,500 angstrom here. So this is the observation which you get the kind of like the final end in these wavelengths. Okay, so this observation is basically looking into the optical UV region. The UV part, which starts at this region up to like soft X-rays. So there is a blank region here. Okay, so this is basically called as UV background. So this part you don't observe. This part you don't observe because none of the telescopes can record the light within our galaxy. Okay, you cannot just throw a telescope in UV outside Earth and record the UV radiation coming out from outside galaxy, because this particular radiation is absorbed by the gas within our galaxy. Okay, so this radiation you have to calculate, you cannot measure it. Okay, so that is why you need a calculation. And then this peak here, around 10 to the power 4 electron volt, like 1 angstrom, is basically the X-ray peak. And then the radiation falls off, okay, going into like gamma rays, okay, up to like tera electron volt gamma rays. So when I say like I'm counting photons, this is what I'm doing. Okay, so let me show you how this background radiation evolves as a function of redshift, because like I'm calculating it. Okay, the point of calculating it is that I can calculate at any redshift. Now, none of your instrument can observe background radiation, extragalactic background light at different redshift. They can only observe at redshift 0. So that is why there are data points only at this plot, redshift 0. Okay, and there are no data points like if I go from redshift 0 and above. Okay, so this is the calculation which I do. And then you see like there is some funny things happening here in UV region. Okay, you remember like this is the UV region here, ultraviolet region, and I'll come back to it when I'm discussing applications. I'm going to glance through the applications because I have kind of finished first part of the talk. Okay, I'm going to just glance through the applications, looking at the time. Yeah, I have enough time. So now the most important question, like this is the kind of question, if I'm giving a talk, like this is informal setting, okay. If I'm giving a talk in a conference or some other place, I should explain people like why do I even count photons first, okay, and then tell about like how do I count it. So let me tell you like why do I count photons, okay. Apart from the obvious fun reasons that I want to know the number density of photons at different wavelengths in the universe. Okay, so one of the application is like you can look into like sources which are emitting in high energy gamma rays. Okay, it's the same plot. Okay, only thing is like this is the radiation coming from one particular source. Okay, which the name of the source is written here, PKS 2155 something. Okay, so this is a radio quasar. Okay, some flat spectrum radio quasar is what people call. Okay, or you can just say like some gamma ray emitting quasar. Okay, so almost every quasar emits in gamma rays, but when I say gamma ray emitting quasar, these are emitting dominantly in gamma rays. Okay, so these are the observations taken from Fermi LAT telescope, which is again the space-based telescope for gamma rays. You see, like there are, okay, especially the Fermi LAT is looking at this wavelength here, okay, on the right-hand side, the rightmost points, okay. So you see, this is the data points are shown with this, like crosses here, red crosses, yellow crosses, and this data points here in purple circles, okay. And then you see like there is a model which is going through this. Okay, so the black line is basically model. So what model tells you is that the energy which you receive from this particular source in this the intensity of radiation which you receive at these energies in tera electron volt. Look at the top axis here. Should lie on this black curve. Okay, but it is not lying on the black curve. So what is happening here? So this is a very interesting thing. Okay, so what is happening here is basically collision between two photons. Okay, so what happens is that when gamma ray photons collide with normal photons of like in an optical and far infrared regime, they can annihilate each other by creating electron-positron pairs. Now, in order to study like how much should be the reduction in the gamma ray photon for such gamma ray sources, you need to know how many photons are there in optical and far infrared. Okay, so this is one of the applications of studying the extragalactic background light or counting photons at all wavelengths. Now the second application which I want to stress is basically studying the intergalactic medium. I told you about quasar, and I spent time on quasar just because I wanted to introduce this thing as well. Okay, so if you look at a quasar, look at this cartoon picture on the right hand side. If you look at a quasar and take a spectrum, okay, taking spectrum meaning like you just observe the radiation coming from the quasar at different wavelengths. Okay, so if you take a spectrum, what you see is that there is a peak here, a characteristic peak of a quasar, okay, which is around 4,400 angstrom in this particular graph. On left-hand side, there are various lines. Okay, these lines are basically absorption lines. Okay, these absorption lines, like we have already figured out, like which absorption it corresponds to. This corresponds to the Lyman alpha absorption of a neutral hydrogen. So if there is a hydrogen gas cloud in between the quasar and you, which is shown in the cartoon here, okay, the radiation from quasar around 1216 angstrom, exactly 1215.67 angstrom, will excite the ground state electron of hydrogen, and the ground state electron will make a transition by absorbing that particular photon. That particular absorption, collectively done by all the atoms in a cloud, will give you an absorption line. Okay, so these absorption lines are basically telling you the distribution of neutral hydrogen gas in the intergalactic medium. Intergalactic medium in the sense the distribution of neutral hydrogen gas between this galaxy, which is your quasar, and you. So this is not a new observation, okay? Like although like maybe like this particular quasar was observed newly again. Okay, maybe I'm showing a spectra which is like newer version, but this was observed in 1965. when this was observed by Gunn, I forgot the author's name. Okay, I know the author who interpreted it. Okay, so when this was observed, this came as a big surprise. Okay, why was it a big surprise? Because people expected if there is a gap between the very distant quasar and you, if there is a gas, you should not see any line here. Okay, why? Because the whole radiation should be absorbed by all the gas in between. The fact that you see the absorption line, it means that the gas is not actually hydrogen gas, okay, but just protons. Okay, just protons are basically the ionized hydrogen. So when you ionize hydrogen, you knock off the electron from the hydrogen atom. What remains is its nucleus. Its nucleus is just proton. What it tells you, and this is the deduction done in 1965 paper by Gunn and Peterson, and this is also called as Gunn-Peterson trap. If you see like huge absorption here, okay, or also sometimes called as Gunn-Peterson effect. So when they did the calculation and found out like how many protons should be there, meaning like how much should be the ionized hydrogen, to their surprise, they found most of the gas should be ionized. Okay, most of the like to give you numbers, if you collect something around 10,000 atoms, okay, 10,000 proton, only one of these would be like proton and electron pair, which is basically your hydrogen atom. Okay, so the conclusion was the gas between your galaxies, okay, which is called as intergalactic medium, is highly ionized. Now, what exactly is ionized in this radiation, this particular gas? The answer is this background, okay, which I showed here. I have the slide. So background radiation, which you see in this tiny region in ultraviolet, okay, this is the radiation which is ionizing the intergalactic medium, and this is one of the main reasons like we studied calculating, like we studied the extragalactic background light. Okay, I'm talking about this particular region. Okay, this is the region of where you don't see any observation, but you need to calculate this particular region in order to understand how the intergalactic medium is ionized. Okay, I'm zooming onto this small region here. Okay, so two things which I want to point out here. There are two dips here. Okay, one on the left hand side, one on the right hand side. The left hand side dip corresponds to, if you look at this energy here, which is greater than 10 electron volt, the exact value is 13.6 electron volt. If you know this energy, you know what is absorbing here. Okay, this is basically the 13.6 electron volt is the potential energy of a hydrogen. So the photons above 13.6 electron volt will be absorbed by hydrogen. Okay, that is why there is this big dip here. Okay, so this radiation, which is getting absorbed, okay, this radiation is basically ionizing the intergalactic medium. On the right hand side, okay, let it go here. You can see like this is close to 50, more than 50 electron volt. Okay, the exact value is 54 electron volt, okay, or 228 angstrom. So this is the absorption coming from hydrogen-like atom, which is basically singly ionized helium, okay, which is like 4 times 13.6 electron volt. Okay, if the atomic physics will just tell you like it scales as atomic number square. Okay. So like this makes our calculation complicated because this is what I explained to you, right? I explained to you like I just need to know quasar distribution, galaxy distribution, and then I can calculate the radiation, which is the extragalactic background light. Okay, but if I want to calculate radiation, which I have already done the calculation, which this is the part which I skipped. Okay, then I need to know one more thing. I need to know what is the distribution of gas in between. Okay, so I'm zooming onto this region now. Okay, so you added the radiation from quasar, you added the radiation from galaxies without taking into account the intergalactic medium. And I'm zooming on very small wavelength region. And you can see like I'm pointing two regions here, 912 angstrom, 228 angstrom. Okay, now the wavelength axis is shifted. Okay, so this 912 angstrom is 13.6 electron volt, this 228 angstrom is 54 0.4 electron volt. Now, if I know what is the distribution of neutral hydrogen gas in the universe, okay, basically the cloud distribution of the IGM, then my equation becomes complicated, because then I have to calculate something called as radiative transfer of this particular all the photons emitted by all the sources through the gas, and this was the most tricky part. Okay, so when you do this, you basically get two dips here. Okay, which is like dip from H1. This is the astronomer's notation of writing hydrogen atom. This is He2. This is astronomer's notation of writing He plus. Okay, which is singly ionized helium. So I'm just going to glance through the applications of this ultraviolet radiation to the intergalactic medium. So the main thing is like so this radiation wavelength, this is supposed to be lambda here, okay? Lambda less than 1000 angstrom. Not only ionizes hydrogen, but also ionizes like helium and other metals, okay? Like in astronomy, everything having atomic number greater than 2, okay, helium is basically called as metal, okay? So like carbon, oxygen, silicon is metals, okay? So therefore, like it's very important to study basically galaxy intergalactic medium connection, because galaxies are where like the stars produce higher elements, basically metals, and throw into the intergalactic medium. And in order to study like how these galaxies evolve and what is the connection between the intergalactic medium and interaction between the galaxy, then you need to understand like what is ionizing metals, for example. And this is where you need this particular radiation. Now these photons not only like ionize the intergalactic medium. When you ionize the hydrogen, the knocked out electron get an extra energy, extra kinetic energy. That kinetic energy is distributed in terms of heat in the intergalactic medium. So you heat the intergalactic medium. The temperature of the intergalactic medium increases, okay, whenever you are ionizing the intergalactic medium. Now, one of the consequences of this particular temperature increase in temperature of IGM is that if you heat the gas doesn't collide and form stars. Okay, if you don't form stars, you don't form galaxies. Okay, so this hampers the formation of galaxies. So that is why the background radiation in ultraviolet is important, not only to find out the thermal history of the intergalactic medium, but also to study the galaxy formation in the universe. And because of all these things, like the UV background, the spectrum which I have calculated is very important ingredient in a cosmological simulations, where people try to simulate how galaxies and everything form. Now, when I said like this is particularly important for galaxy formation, because the UV radiation which is emitted by stars, whenever the stars and galaxies born, they basically start ionizing the universe. Okay, and this ionization is also called as reionization. So the last part, I'm just going to glance through this part. Okay, giving you a brief history, and that will be the end of my talk. Okay, so the UV background, not only UV background, the whole background light, okay, maybe not in X-ray and gamma rays, but the whole background light is very important to understand the evolution of intergalactic medium as well as evolution of galaxies. And I'm going to give you the last part here. Okay, I'm going to explain you what is reionization. So look at this particular image. Okay, so this is a pictorial representation or a concise history of the universe. So something around like the top part is basically showing you Big Bang. Something around 500 million years after the Big Bang, okay, which is around redshift of 20 to 30, the first galaxies and first stars starts to form. Okay, when they form, they emit in ultraviolet radiation. They emit in all other radiation as well. Okay, and that is what I calculate. But especially in ultraviolet radiation, when they emit, this UV radiation ionizes surrounding hydrogen and helium gas. This creates ionized bubble around galaxies. Okay, as the universe evolves, there are more and more galaxies forming, and already existing bubbles are also growing. Okay, so all these bubbles coincide together around 1 billion years, okay, which is redshift around 6. So this is where you can see the whole universe is basically ionized. Okay, so this is where you get like completely ionized universe. When I say completely, I'm telling you that the one atom out of 10,000 proton is basically neutral. Okay, so this is called as epoch of hydrogen reionization. Exactly same thing happens for helium reionization. the reionization of singly ionized helium around something like 2 billion years, okay, which is redshift of 3 somewhere here, okay, like, let's see the mouse cursor somewhere here. And that is driven by the quasar. And while this is happening, okay, galaxies are forming. While this is happening, the universe is getting, like, the ionized radiation basically heating the intergalactic medium. So while this is happening, it is also hampering the formation of galaxies. Okay, so this is intimately related, like the radiation emitted by stars and as well as formation of galaxies. Okay. So this is what you study by studying the extragalactic background light, by counting photons basically. That's all I have for the reference. You can for papers on extragalactic background light, you can look at these papers. Okay, and you can also look into the introduction of these papers to see like what people have done in the past. Applications of extragalactic background light, I'm just listing few of the papers, okay, especially the paper which I have written. Okay. Yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vikram, for a very informative and very lucidly explaining all the concepts, complex things which you have explained. It is open for discussions. If anybody has any question, you can either directly ask it by unmuting yourself, or you can type it in the chat, and we will see that it is seen and answered.
Hello, Vikram sir.
Hi.
Sir, I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned star sign in all wavelengths.
Yes.
Is there any more reference available to read about that? Because I found it very interesting, because I'm still in MSc.
Yes,
So
yes.
a bit more about it, sir.
Yeah, like, okay. I don't know a reference on like top of my head right now, okay? But I'm sure like you can find those on just doing Google search, okay? So nowadays, like Google search will yield you nice references, okay? But right now, I don't know, okay? Even like I don't know the names of textbooks.
Okay, sir. Because
But like, see, like if you want to look at the image of star, like you can just type on Google the image of sun in different wavelengths, and you will see very, very nice images. Okay. Only thing one has to remember, like when you are seeing these nice images, they are false color images. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So for X-ray, they will give red color. Okay. For ultraviolet, they will paint it to the blue color. Okay. So only thing is like you'll see the structures there.
Okay, sir. Means, as you, sir, you had mentioned that some dust in UV absorbs ultraviolet and it re-emits in infrared.
Yes. Yes.
Because that are the parts which are very rarely available on Google. Means they don't directly give on Google or anything.
Huh.
So
Okay.
at what wavelengths we can just see? Means if we are seeing that wavelength, I am not able to get. Means, is it a dust or a star which is emitting that wavelength?
Now, when you are looking at star, okay, so when you are looking at star, you are basically, this is also complicated. Okay, so you have to look into the stars which are not in the dusty regions of the galaxy. Okay, if you are looking at the dusty regions of the galaxy, then you will get a very blurry image in infrared, which is basically coming from the dust. Okay. So when people want to study the infrared emission or like far infrared emission from the stars, they basically look into the region which are not that dust dominant. Okay. Also, there are ways by which you can remove the contribution of this dust. I'm not sure about how to remove in images. Okay, but like in spectrum, there are ways to remove the contribution from dust.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
I think we do have one question. What is the difference between corpuscles and photons?
Okay. So when I was preparing this talk, I was thinking like I should add Newton's picture there. Okay, Newton has this famous picture with this prism in his hand, right? Not picture, basically. There is somebody drawn this thing, right? But the thing is, the corpuscular theory was also on the same line. Okay. Only thing is, like Newton was assuming that it is basically like exactly like a particle. Okay. So the corpuscular theory can be like easily discarded because this particular assumption that they are like particles don't work. Okay. But like if you can just modify Newton's theory, okay, corpuscle, you make them like massless particle, let them travel with the speed of light, and then you have kind of photon, okay, something equivalent to the photon. Thanks for the question. There was one question in the chat.
Yeah, from the Rinku, one question is that we know that universe is expanding, but it is expanding in what? How is space being created? That's a nice question.
Yeah, so this is the kind of question like everybody who is explaining the expansion gets, okay. So it's not expanding into anything, okay. The universe itself is expanding. So that is the concise answer, okay. And people give analogies. Analogies are also bad, okay. In the sense like the people give analogies like you draw dots on the balloon and then you like inflate the balloon, okay. And this is how the universe is expanding. But like, again, the balloon is expanding in something else, right?
Yeah.
So the universe itself is expanding. Okay, the universe itself is not creating the space. Okay, the space is basically your universe.
Vikram, I have a small question. I will just
Sure.
So you have in one of your slides you have shown that this photons come and annihilate and then generate proton positron pair somewhere.
Right, electron positron pair. Yes.
Electron positron pair. Yeah. So then how do you actually measure the density or something like that? How much actually has been formed, because you are not able to measure the radiation. That's what you said.
No, it's right now the state of the gamma ray astrophysics and the constraints on extragalactic background is like you don't get like so if you have an observation, okay, at least for the quasar for the gamma ray sources which are quite nearby, okay, then what you see is like you see there is a cutoff, okay, the way I showed in the figure, okay, that you see like a very sharp cutoff in the gamma rays in tera-electron volt. What people do is like they use like I'll try to share the screen, okay, so that is better. So what people do is like they use this particular information. Okay, they use information on this like this data points here, and they model the radiation which is like coming from like using this radiation. This is basically like you can come with the different models. Okay, like the modeling part is like I think it's pretty complicated to explain here. Okay, but you use this information and model what should be the radiation here in TeV. Okay, and this is where like you see like this particular cutoff is because these photons are getting lost. Okay, and then that is where like for the quasars which are at like for the quasars or gamma ray emitting sources, mostly they're quasars. So for those quasars, you can actually see this cutoff and find out how much is the optical depth, or like how many photons are getting lost in the because of this electron positron pairs. Okay, so in other words, you can use this information to find out what should be the radiation background in here in infrared regime. Okay, because TeV is basically, if you look at the cross section, TeV is basically TeV photons are mostly colliding with infrared and giving you electron positron pairs. But when I say the EBL has application to this particular problem is when like you are looking at the very high redshift or very distant gamma ray sources. There you don't even see the cutoff. Okay, but then you know why you don't see it. Okay, or why you don't even see the cutoff, because like there is huge density of photon. Okay, because the TeV photons have to travel a very large distance through the sea of infrared photons, which is basically killing all the TeV energies. Okay.
Yeah.
I hope I answered your question.
And Khushi Singla So one of our viewers have put up a question that how is energy in packets when we have a continuous spectrum of wavelength on which energy depends?
Yeah, okay, very good question. Okay, I was hoping somebody should ask this. So energy in packets is for a particular wavelength. Okay, so if you are looking at electromagnetic radiation at particular wavelength, lambda, okay, then it will only have energies in terms of hc divided by lambda. Okay, integer numbers of hc divided by lambda. Hc divided by lambda is one packet. Okay, so you can have one packet of this energy or two packet of this energy. You can never have 1.5 packet of this energy. So that is what is meaning of quantization. Okay, the wavelengths can be uniform, but at any wavelength you cannot have continuous distribution of energy. That is the quantization. Thanks for the question.
Yeah. Anybody else? Any other questions? Okay, so if there is no more questions, I think I'll ask my colleague Joel to formally give a vote of thanks. Joel?
Yeah. Good evening, all. We had an interesting session today, and I take this opportunity to extend our sincere thanks to our distinguished guest, Dr. Vikram Kaire. It was an interesting session, sir. Thank you. Thanks a lot. And I also take this opportunity to thank all our viewers who are watching this program in our YouTube, Facebook, and Google Meet platforms. Thank you all. We will meet on the next month with another interesting topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So we formally finish this session today.
Thanks, Chan. Thanks, Binoy.
Thank you, Vikramji.